The Trump administration's policy to focus on white Afrikaners by offering them refugee status in the United States, now supported by a bill just introduced into Congress, falls into the same trap as the ANC does, understanding South Africa as a conflict between black and white. When mainstream media accused Trump of peddling false news on South Africa and that the government's expropriation policies hold no threat and that farmers are not disproportionately targeted by violent attacks, they are wrong. But the Trump administration gets it just as wrong, in as far as its policies imply that white South Africans bear the brunt of these abuses at the hands of their black fellow countrymen. In far more respects than the Trump team appears to realize, black and white South Africans share common values and are jointly victims of civil rights abuses of their government. Take property rights as an example. Whites who hold the bulk of privately held land in the country face risks from South Africa's new expropriation laws. But there are already millions of black South Africans who are denied title to the property they occupy. Across the fertile east of South Africa, research shows that black people may hold more than half of the best agricultural land by value, but are denied formal rights to that land. So whilst white and black commercial farmers face new threats to their property rights, there are already millions of black people whose rights are already expropriated by the government. In terms of violence, the sense of some of South Africa's leading experts is that black commercial farmers are attacked at the same, if not an even greater rate than white farmers. Thousands of informal black smallholders face terrible rates of stock theft and looting that often bankrupt their small businesses and live with the constant threat of violent retribution if they speak out or seek to recover their meager assets. To the extent that South African activists have been responsible for feeding the idea in America that whites are the exclusive victims of the government's neglect and that black communities have en masse been complicit in that neglect, they have done the country a great disservice. In fact, it is black South Africans who have suffered the most as a result of the government's lack of delivery in healthcare, education, power and safety. Opinion polls show that the vast majority of all South Africans, black and white, want the same things: the dignity of a job that pays a living wage, a free market economy, merit-based appointments, distrust of government control of healthcare. The data says that only 1 in 3 ANC voters support the Expropriation Act, and less than 10% of all voters regard land reform as a priority. By making this about race, the Trump administration plays into the hands of the ANC, who are most comfortable in fighting on that terrain, but who would have been totally wrong-footed had the Trump administration made the issue about common values. We need to move beyond the politics of race and toward the politics of shared values. Black and white South Africans share common ground on the basic values of faith in God, family, hard work, decency, respect, rule of law. South Africa is essentially, according to all of the opinion polls, a moderate, center-right, conservative society where the bulk of people share many of the values that are common to Trump's own supporters in America. In answer to the question, where in the world people would like to live and raise their children, 73% of South Africans who had a preference picked the United States and the West as opposed to Cuba, China, and Russia. There is an historic opportunity for a deep alliance to emerge between America and South Africa, an alliance of shared values that can bring economic growth to South Africa through investment and trade deals and can secure America's geostrategic interests on the continent and the surrounding oceans. Racial nationalist propaganda will bring only hate and suffering to our country, and South Africa's only chance to be successful and free and an open society is to tap the goodwill that exists in the common values shared by the majority of South Africa's people, regardless of their race, history, or social and economic status. It is imperative for South Africans, and especially those with influence in America, to impress upon the Trump administration that its recent South Africa policies imply a racial divide in the country that plays into the dangerous leftist trope that has been traditionally employed by the enemies of Western values to divide and break the common bonds that exist between people, of seeing modern societies as defined by racial groups racked in destructive conflict over limited resources. Woke leftist thinking holds that every society is divided into two absolute, unbridgeable, racially determined groups. The first is the black group and the second is the white group. The members of these groups have little agency of their own, meaning that their values are assigned to them at birth by their race. Woke left dogma holds that in every society these two groups are in a permanent conflict over resources and values, and the trajectory of that society is determined by which group can dominate the other. But that is not true. It is the individual human being and his or her character and values that matter most. This core defining principle of modern liberal democracies is echoed in the United States Founding Declaration. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, amongst them the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These words that establish the most prosperous, advanced, and free country in human history comes from the divine values and vision of the book of Genesis, held so dear by the founders of the United States. And it is the book of Genesis that tells us that God created the human being in His image, which means with a godly soul that is capable of innovation, grit, courage, and greatness. The Talmud notes that when God created animal and plant life, He did so en masse, and entire species of innumerable numbers of them. And yet, with the human being, God created just one man and one woman at the beginning. He did so, says the Talmud, to eradicate racism so that human beings would not be seen as groups descended from different ancestors, but rather one humanity descended from one common father and mother. That is the vision and values South Africa and America, and indeed the entire world, needs now more than ever. For each of us to see one another as sovereign, precious individuals with divine greatness and potential, and together to create societies that can empower each of us to flourish. May God bless us all.